Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 9th, 2023. Time for another, one of these whole weeks of shows. Lots happening, of course, domestically and internationally. I think a lot of additional eyes on the international picture, more so than usual today and over the weekend. It was hard to escape the news during the weekend, and we start today under something of a cloud. I mean, this is, ordinarily we do occasionally touch on Israeli, Palestinian issues, really more Israeli politics than anything else. And from that perspective, we tend to make it a horse race kind of a thing more than anything else. So we would be guilty then of the same sort of, narrow focus that we accuse the American journalism community of in covering our own elections, except that one, we're not Israelis, so it doesn't matter a great deal what we have to say about those things, and it doesn't influence elections in the same way. It isn't our country, and we watch it from afar. And here, of course, we could expect better for coverage of domestic politics. In fact, if you wanted better coverage of the domestic politics in Israel, you could read Israeli papers. They will tell you what's going on. But all eyes are there this Monday, with the exception, of course, of any eyes that might have wandered over to the devastating earthquake in Afghanistan. It was not a good weekend for anything, really. It was very tough, hard to watch. And I, of course, as you may have noticed, say on social media, that most of my social media timeline was occupied with people griping about how difficult it was to make any sort of comment at all, or no comment at all about the situation, and then get themselves attacked for not addressing the totality of the situation as other people saw it. So it's fraught with danger, of course. And I don't know. To me, it just, because everything is about us, and it's a domestic politics show. The big thought for me was having heard the news that a lot of the initial attack was focused not only on nearby settlements close to Gaza, but also that a music festival held in the desert there nearby, which in hindsight looks like a terrible idea, was also attacked, and some 250 or more people who were attending this thing were killed there, and hundreds more wounded. Outrageous attack, just shocking to see. And also someone has reminded me, in scale, the 9 to 10 million people living in Israel and the occupied territories makes the death of several hundred on both sides, and nearing 1,000 perhaps or more, and I'm sure that the totals will only go up, is the rough equivalent of seeing 20,000 people here in a country of our size killed in these attacks, even more, perhaps. So, to scale, I think the Israelis, quite rightly regard it as their 9/11, not only because of the scale, but because of the surprise and shock somehow at these attacks, and the fact that there was clearly some sort of intelligence failure, a failure to detect an operation of this size, which is supposed to be the whole reason that anybody submits to the nonsense of a Netanyahu government to begin with. So I don't know. I'm not there. I'm not Israeli. I don't watch that closely. But that's the sort of the chatter in American political circles that I witnessed over the weekend. Maybe your mileage varied there, but it really does sort of begin to seem like Israel is collecting what's due for having installed essentially a Trumpist-type government. In fact, I did see something this morning on social media on Blue Sky, which makes it difficult because I can't without all of you having invitations. And you can all come and collect invitations from me, a few at a time anyway. I'm aware of some interesting efforts out there to try to distribute all of these invites that are sitting unused from among many of the users that have been there for a couple of weeks. But it's difficult for me to show it to you because you can't see it if you're not on Blue Sky. But I did see that there was mention of, or I guess, how do I put this? Hilzoy sharing this piece from, what is FT, Financial Times? And somebody else, because it's a subscription service, has grabbed a screenshot of it here. Nate O sharing this clip from the story when head of Shin Bet, the Israeli domestic intelligence service, warned Netanyahu earlier this year that deadly attacks by settlers on Palestinians would increase the security threat to Israel, i.e., prompt retaliation. He was roundly denounced by members of Netanyahu's Likud party. One Likud member of parliament complained, "The ideology of the left," this is the quote that I'm here for, "the ideology of the left has reached the top echelons of the Shin Bet. The deep state," they actually use this, "the deep state has infiltrated the leadership of the Shin Bet and the IDF. They were warning this is going to prompt some reaction. We have a pretty good idea what sorts of reactions we get from Palestinians when they are met with force. What do we think is going to happen? This is deep state woke ideology." They're shaking their fists among the Likud party. And, Netanyahu is there supposedly because he's the only one who can keep the country safe, just as, of course, George W. Bush kept us safe as the Washington sniper made his rounds and shot people at supermarkets all across Northern Virginia for a couple of weeks. The same claim turns out to be not worth very much in the face of terrorism, for one thing. Not a great weapon against terrorism, just insisting that you'll just not have terrorism. You see, we'll just keep people safe. Very tough. And of course, like I said, his whole reason for being was to make sure that supposedly something like this wouldn't happen. The various cabinet ministers who have worked their way into the Israeli government in an effort to cobble together a right-wing coalition has brought, I guess, Israel to the point where they realize, having a government full of deeply unserious ass clowns is not actually a great way to provide any security. Shaking your fist and swearing that you'll kill everybody doesn't actually do anything. But some people really love that as a rallying point. And worse still, now they're in a position to claim that they have an excuse to, quote-unquote, deliver on their, quote-unquote, policy, which is even worse. So it was interesting. This piece is the title of it is part of the reason why it was shared, I think. A bitter blame game will follow Israel's wartime unity. The inquest into what went wrong ahead of Hamas's attack could lead down a dangerous path. And I don't know for whom, probably for everybody. But it's a remarkable situation. We'll have to watch how it plays itself out, because I don't think anybody's going to listen to us, quite honestly, in terms of, hey, maybe we should not just go all out at each other's throats. That seems to be kind of the default position here. All right, Greg Dworkin is here. There's lots to round up. There's lots of domestic implication to this for us, of course, and that really has to be where our focus is, because I'm not Israeli, and I don't think I should try to pretend. Anyway, good morning, Greg. How are you?
Okay.
Yes.
It's certainly a difficult week, and whether the post-trauma of seeing something like a 9/11 style massacre, brings up memories of 9/11 or brings up memories of, Sandy Hook or whatever. I mean, these things happen. These things are real.
Yes, I was reminded, too. I almost forgot that. I wanted to go back to this. Is almost exactly 6 years to the day since the attack in Las Vegas.
Yeah, for
music
example.
festival. That's what I was thinking about. Music festivals. Here in America, that one guy shot 500 people, and we don't really think about it.
Right. So, a lot happening.
Yeah.
The first thing I want to say about it is that if you follow the Israeli press, Haaretz is my favorite go-to site, but also the Jerusalem Post, which is more conservative, the Times of Israel, which is sort of middle of the road.
Okay, good roadmap.
There's stuff you see there in their press that you simply wouldn't see in the American press. For example, right after 9/11.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so a couple of days after this happens, shock at what happened, shock at how porous the border is. And this is an editorial from Haaretz. Netanyahu bears responsibility for this Israel-Gaza war. Now, they don't pull any punches.
All right.
They say, look, it's his fault. It's his job to not have this happen.
Israelis
he
are
fell
pretty
asleep
direct
at the wheel. They're really, really angry about this. And the thing is that, part of the background for this, of course, is the ongoing occupation. And having people, 2 million or so, or however many million people live in Gaza with few options.
2, 3, lots.
But also some deliberate decisions by the right-wing government, as you were reading, in terms of what happens with the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, the army.
Yeah.
In other words, the bulk of it was on the West Bank.
Yes.
And they were put there to protect settlements.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is that Netanyahu's government made the assumption that things were okay in Gaza and the more pressing need was on the West Bank. And part of that is their view of Hamas as being unwilling to engage in this sort of violence. And the point is, all strategic thinking from the Netanyahu government as of this morning is out the window.
Yeah, I guess so.
They were wrong about everything, or as another Israeli on Twitter said, if you think that Israel's going to unite behind Netanyahu and this is going to help him politically, you don't know Israelis.
Excellent. That's an excellent point, and probably needs to be kept in mind when we're analyzing as Americans anybody else's domestic situation. We're not going to get it, but we can read as much as we can and learn along the way. Yeah, this will be really a reckoning for him. And remember also, I'm reminded that we're not done with and just essentially came out of one of the more intense periods during which there was a real tension in Israel over the judicial reforms.
Still going on.
It's still going on, of course, but there was a moment there when the Israeli Defense Forces, the top brass, were speaking out and saying, I don't really feel as justified as I used to in serving in the IDF under this sort of regime. And now, of course, this sort of regime has to call out the IDF in a show of unity, and we need to mobilize, and they're mobilizing 300,000 reserves.
They got 300,000 people overnight. I mean, they're very good at that. And people will do what they need to do in their view.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with the politics of the judicial system. But there's no question that, again, what Israelis are doing are saying, okay, we need to do whatever we need to do to rally behind the military. But we also are fully cognizant and aware of the fact that Netanyahu took his eye off the ball. Yeah. And instead of paying attention to the military, he was doing this judicial thing. We haven't forgotten that.
He was antagonizing the military, as it turns out. Yeah, I mean, so, right, they're, of course, of the mind of, we'll do what we need to do to lock things down quickly and restore some kind of an order, but not in the, all glory to the government
Exactly
sense.
Right. And so that, here's an example. This is a commenter, pundit, talking head, former international media advisor to the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, IDF vet named Elan Levy, who comments frequently on Twitter. And he said, look, this is going to be Netanyahu's legacy, not the COVID vaccines, the Abraham Accords, the judicial reform, the protests. The history books are going to open with one of the deadliest terror attacks in world history on his watch after nearly 15 years in charge of our security. And here's another one, which I think is just fascinating when you look at it and think about the implications. This is Daniel Seidemann, who I think is also a journalist, I think. who says his bio says all things Jerusalem.
Okay.
General Gershon HaKohen, emphatically right-wing and confidant of Netanyahu, said the following, and I quote, it's a translation of the Hebrew. Truth be told, Netanyahu's objective is to prevent the two-state option and therefore turn Hamas into his closest ally. Openly, Hamas is the enemy, beneath the surface an ally. That is to say, Hamas helped Netanyahu with his objectives, prevent a two-state option, concentrate on other things.
I see.
And he goes on to say there's been some questions about the tweet that Netanyahu was soft on Hamas and did everything to undermine the PEA, the Palestinian Authority. Has been common knowledge for years. It's just that HaKohen said the quiet part out loud.
Well, that's a problem.
Right? It's not that,
that
Netanyahu wanted the
in
attack.
both countries.
It's not that he allowed it. He's just responsible for creating the circumstances that made it possible. He thought we could simply contain Hamas or ignore Hamas for various and sundry domestic reasons, and that's wrong.
As it turns out, yes. I also read from one other source, although now I don't know if I can put my finger on it, that Hamas was engaged in a project of making it seem like they were not interested in launching attacks like that. And even though, as it turns out, they were training for it out in the open, they convinced everybody that it was merely about imposing order in Gaza, and that the current leadership of Hamas was more concerned with improving economic conditions and daily life in Gaza than in striking back in any retaliatory attacks. And that, I guess, enabled the policy of concentration on the West Bank, probably where, again, I don't know enough about Israeli politics to know for sure, but that may be the center of the current government's political support. The idea being the West Bank settlers were the ones pushing for this right-wing government and wanted to see their views reflected in government, and government gave them what they were asking for, and in so doing, took its eye off of the ball at Gaza, and I guess allows things like, I don't know who you have to talk to about permitting a giant music festival. It just seemed to me like a giant music festival in the shadow of Gaza ever is a terrible idea. But what do I know? I don't plan such things in Israel, but that seems like something in hindsight they may want to think about as well. It seems anywhere where there's that kind of deprivation and suffering, but you can hear music wafting over the walls, is probably not a great idea.
Well, odd situation. So again, the implication isn't that in any way, shape, or form the current right-wing Israeli government was collaborating with Hamas in any way, shape, or form. But there's been a power struggle between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. Mm-hmm. There's been less than clarity in terms of what everybody's goals are, but Israel's goals was clearly to try to ignore Gaza as much as possible, and that's no longer possible. So, horrible situation, no good answers there. But I'm just trying to, from the Israeli commenters, trying to set the scene of what some of the atmospherics are like there.
Yeah, it's the best we can do.
And I'm ignoring, most of the American commentators, because it's, this is not something that ought to be seen from a U.S.-centric point of view.
Not if
the
you're trying to
Republicans
figure
love
it
to
out.
blame
We have our
Biden
own
for this
problems.
already. It's ridiculous. They may as well blame him for taking his
course.
eye off the ball on the earthquake in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Why didn't he prevent it?
They tried mightily over the weekend, and unrestrained by any sort of respect
Logic
for the truth or logic,
decency or anything.
Right. It was naturally. They posted their stakes out as far as possible. There was lots of pushback and yelling at them, but they still ended up retreating to a place that's equally ridiculous. But up to beginning with,
because,
Biden
again,
financed
as you
this
pointed
with
out,
taxpayer
this is a
dollars.
show about domestic politics, and their domestic politics are so screwed up at the moment that they had no choice but to try to blame Democrats for something. They were in blame Democrats for something mode just because of what's going on in the House.
They were already doing that. Yeah, that's right. And it is tied to it. But then to see them using the same rhetoric, of course, in Israel is kind of amazing, and gives you some understanding of exactly what the problem might be as an analog to the United States, that the response to this, even in Israel, where they actually know the situation, is, well, the deep state has infiltrated the security apparatus. No, you're the security apparatus. You just did a terrible job at it. But I guess same thing. Like, we can't exactly at this point in Israeli domestic politics blame the left ordinarily. But I think that there are actually some people saying, I don't know. It seems to work in the United States. Maybe we ought to try that. Blame the left. But meanwhile here, accusing Biden of having sent taxpayer money to Hamas. No. And really, I don't even have to explain that. It's always going to be a no. That's crazy. And that's, QAnon pizza conspiracy level thinking. But it happens here in the United States. And it feeds into the social media. And now, by the way, if you ask your Alexa what happened in the Middle East, it will tell you something like that, as it turns out. Really thinking about the election thing. That was another thing I caught over the weekend. Alexa being poisoned by the fact that large swaths of the internet are full of misinformation and disinformation, and right. Alexa can't tell the difference.
AI of Alexa will tell you the election was stolen in 2020 if you ask it, and that's what David's referring to. So,
yes. Thank you.
The weird thing is that sometimes crises bring things to a head. Blaming Biden for everything, blaming Democrats for everything, after what happened in the House with the speaker election, has gotten so silly that what in fact may happen is that there's going to be ratcheted up pressure, which is already starting, for Tommy Tuberville to release his holds on military appointments because it's important.
Yeah.
For Ukraine money to be released, and for Republicans to start cooperating on national and world security because it's important. So sometimes crises just sort of sweep away all the garbage. Sometimes they don't. And it'll be interesting to see how a lot of this breaks down.
We'll see which kind of crisis this is. Also wrapped up in that was Rand Paul has been imposing holds on senior State Department appointments, including an ambassador to Israel, of which there is none at the moment. So between Tuberville and Paul, yes, the senior people who would ordinarily be formulating response and handling the crisis are just not in place. So that's an issue for us to work out as well.
So, again, that's background for some of the stuff we're going to talk about domestically. There was a story about Kristen Welker interviewing some swing voters in Pennsylvania.
All right.
And this is actually rather funny.
All right.
Pennsylvania Republican swing voter, says Jonathan Allen, tells Kristen Welker after saying Biden is approaching her in the throes of senility and Trump is just an out-and-out a-hole.
Oh,
well, who are you going to vote? Well, I would vote for Biden even if he were dead.
Oh, well, all right. That's interesting. I mean,
it is. And, I think it captures a lot of what the polls are missing. There's a good chunk of the population who really are not happy with how things are going. How could you? Look at what's going on in Israel. That's not good for the world, whatever side you take on it. And just as an example, high prices, whatever. And there are maybe 2/3 of the population that would rather see somebody other than Trump and Biden run against each other. And there's about 1/4 of the population, when you poll them, who really haven't decided who they want, but I don't like either one. But when push comes to shove, they'll break for Biden like they did in 2020, which is how he won.
Okay.
The polls don't pick that up because they're not ready. What they're trying to tell the pollsters is, I don't want to think about politics right now. Leave me alone. And, of course, the polls won't.
Right.
And so
even though they don't matter,
you're not doing likely voters yet because you don't know who that is. And those, if you take 25% of your sample out because they're telling you they really don't want to talk to you, in the end, I'll talk to you. I'll just tell you I really don't like either one of them. Then you're not going to get the right answer about who's ahead. And that's one of the many, many reasons it's just way too early to start polling this stuff. So when you're talking about, this is also contributing to the fact that Biden's behind, you don't know Biden's behind. Yeah. You'd have to believe that black voters aren't going to vote for him, that young voters aren't going to vote for him, and a whole bunch of other garbage that the polls just haven't really sorted out yet to think that that's true. We don't know.
It's funny that they keep polling.
As somebody pointed out,
look, they have to.
We have the polls. which are saying that it's really close, and it probably will be close, that somehow or other Biden isn't ahead by enough, or that Trump is ahead, or whichever poll you look. And then we have special election results, which are all favoring Democrats, with the continued saliency of post-Dobbs world with abortion. But there's a third thing that we should really pay close attention to, and that would be the Virginia election, which is going to be in a month.
Whoops. Oh, yeah, right. Whoops. I got to go do that.
Yeah, whoops, you really ought to go do that, because early voting has started. It's been going on for a while.
That's right.
As we talked about on the show, it's really difficult to take a look and see who's ahead, because this is a House and Senate, Virginia House and Virginia Senate race. So each individual district matters, and you can't look at the state as a whole. It's not a Senate or presidential statewide or governor, statewide thing. It's district by district. So unless you have intimate knowledge of each individual district,
I don't.
It's really hard to know what's going on. Hampton Roads, Pocasson, some of the smaller communities, which may lean Republican but currently have a Democrat in office, or lean Democrat but currently have a Republican in office. It's very, very close. The most recent generic poll I saw out had Democrats up by 1 point. That doesn't tell you who's going to win. And so, we're going to have to wait for that, but that's going to be in a month.
Yes, that's right. It's coming up, and I don't know if anybody has a clear picture of what's going on, although I have been watching some interesting coverage, having seen the governor campaign supposedly on education issues, people now realizing education hasn't actually gotten any better as far as I can tell. That's weird.
It's going to make a lot of pundits eat their shoes.
Shoes.
Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. To heck with the governor here in Virginia. Just want to throw that in there by way of transitioning back to that. But I think we're actually done. Perhaps we're done with. Are we done with that subject? Not knowing what's going on in the polls is a bigger subject.
Let me just transition this way. Let me segue this way. This is Stephen Dennis, congressional reporter.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and says, while Israel goes to war, the United States has no Speaker of the House.
Right.
Has no confirmed ambassador to Israel.
True.
Operating under a CR, continuing resolution.
Right.
Tuberville is stalling military nominations. And the Senate is out of town this week.
Is any of that bad?
Unclear.
Okay.
And so, part of the discussion that we had last week, and sometimes I think these process discussions that we have, it's always gratifying to find out that they actually matter. Part of the discussion is, all right, Patrick McHenry is the acting Speaker pro tempore, acting Speaker pro tem.
That's right. Acting! You bet.
What does it mean? What can he do? What can he not do?
Yes.
One thing it means is the White House said, you know what? We need to get a briefing to the House as to what's going on here. And since there's no Speaker, I think we'll use Hakeem Jeffries for this.
Oh.
So they gave the official briefing to Hakeem Jeffries, who's going to try to organize the House and give a briefing to the House.
That's
one of the things it means to be acting Speaker pro tem, which is different than acting Speaker.
Yeah.
Now, the House could elect.
It is. That's true, too.
Patrick McHenry is acting Speaker.
Yes, not just as Speaker. You can elect him for anything. Remember, in the background here, House can do whatever it wants. Always. So, all right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, see, the point there is and we talked about on the show last week, the powers of the acting Speaker pro tem depend on somewhat what the precedents and rules say, but a lot more about what the House will let him get away with.
Yes.
But that's different than how the White House, an external agent, decides to treat McHenry.
That is real. I hadn't given that any consideration. This is innovative.
In a way.
I would be very angry if it was the Trump administration doing this.
Right. But, it is actually, pretty innovative.
Yeah.
And so external forces, like how the Senate treats the office of acting Speaker pro tem, and how the White House treats the office of acting Speaker pro tem, sort of matter.
Yeah. I have a good thread, which I can share either now or later, from Matt Glassman, who I thought put together a good explainer. Yeah, me too. Quickly becoming one of my favorites. A good explainer of something I was trying to explain in my own way to people I was discussing it with early in the weekend.
Well,
but I don't think I did a good job. But he puts it this way. But basically, underlying everything, the too long didn't read is the House can do whatever it wants. And so if you're worried, well, now the House can't aid Israel, if that's your issue, or the House can't. Yeah, right. Can't. Right. The answer is it certainly can if it decides to do it. Now it's a little less orthodox in their approach to things. But Matt Glassman puts it this way: if the House believes it needs to act, it can, among other things, I would say, it can elect a Speaker pro tem. If they're not ready to elect, say, Patrick McHenry Speaker, they could say, well, we elect you as Speaker pro tem. You're no longer acting Speaker pro tem. You're actual Speaker pro tem. That's different from Speaker. It can just do that. Or it can pass a resolution empowering McHenry to act as an elected Speaker pro tem for a limited time. Or it can just acquiesce to McHenry taking action. No requirement to have an actual Speaker on hand exists. What is true right now is that under the widely accepted interpretation of Rule 1, Clause 8b3, if you want a citation, McHenry does not currently have authority to lead the House in the consideration of legislation, but that's emphatically different than saying the House can't act until it elects a Speaker. What McHenry can or can't do is very different from what the House can or can't do in the absence of a Speaker. The House retains full authority to do essentially anything it wants, even if it doesn't elect a Speaker. And then he adds one note: acquiescing to McHenry doing things, absent a resolution authorizing such behavior, could likely be challenged by a point of order from a single member. True, but does he get anywhere is the next question, which could require a House majority to overturn a ruling of the chair. If you object and say he doesn't have the power to do this, and the parliamentarian says you're right, because currently you are, but then they hold a vote, and all the Republicans show up and say, we vote to overturn the ruling of the chair, poof, McHenry has the power. They've just said he does. And that, last part of this tweet thread, but we have to get past the idea that the House is paralyzed absent a Speaker. The House has chosen not to empower a chair pending the election of a Speaker, but they are free to reverse that decision at any time and do not need an elected Speaker to take legislative action. I think that's a pretty clear view of it.
Right. And if you step back and look at the bigger picture here, the House is paralyzed and frozen because the House is paralyzed and frozen. That started when they tried to elect McCarthy, and it took 15 rounds in order to do so. So it's been true the entire time. It's based on the tiny Republican majority and the fact that, 8 or 10, if not 20 of that majority are complete and total nutcases and nihilists. So, that's really the issue. It's just that this crisis in Israel puts everything in focus. Here is Vanity Fair, and the little title of the section that they decide to put this in is called GOP Chaos. And the headline is, Get Their Act Together, House GOP Speakership Chaos Complicates Israel Response. So having an acting Speaker pro tempore complicates what the House is doing, but it doesn't prevent the House from doing something.
Right. It gives people a chance to object and say, are we sure we want to do this way without a Speaker? And the House can answer, yep, if you can put that vote together.
The reason I wanted you to highlight that, I think Matt Glassman's right, I think you're right, is because of the response from somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about how the House works, but you'd think he would, and that would be former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Or former disgraced Speaker Kevin McCarthy, however you want to refer to him.
He's currently disgraced former Speaker.
Right? So the quote from McCarthy is, there's nothing the House can do until they elect a Speaker, and I don't know if that happens quickly. That's simply not true.
Yeah, well, we do find from time to time that it turns out that the leaders don't really know, and their staff has to tell them.
Right. Oh, well, who are you to criticize Kevin McCarthy, who's there in the room? And then, look,
yeah,
the guy's an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes even when they're not idiots, they just don't really know. And things have always kind of worked this way, so I assumed that, but I never read the book.
Or, you know, the other way of looking at it, look, buddy, it's my business not to know.
Right. Yeah.
There's a reason
know
I don't
better
know.
than
It's
anyone.
my business. I get paid not to know, and it's to my advantage not to know.
Nobody doesn't know like me.
Yeah, exactly. Turmoil in the House of Representatives, which has been without a speaker for nearly a week, is potentially hamstringing U.S. action on an unfolding war in Israel, and as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows, quote, mighty vengeance, end quote, in response to unprecedented Hamas attack. There's nothing the House can do until they elect a speaker. I don't know if that happens quickly. Former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted from the job last Tuesday, it was only a week ago, following a revolt from several far-right members, told Fox News. McCarthy's ouster was a historic first, of course. Now, the House Majority Leader is traditionally part of the Gang of Eight, a bipartisan group of congressional leaders who receive sensitive intelligence briefings. McHenry isn't cleared to receive Gang of Eight briefings.
Yeah, so 7 in this gang at the moment.
One of which is going to be Hakeem Jeffries.
Yes.
But President Joe Biden does technically have the authority to give him clearance. The senior administration told NBC News the prospect was under consideration. While I let you twist in the wind, I'll think about it.
Yeah. On that subject, like, it might seem like the diplomatic thing to do to clear McHenry. But I remind you also, last week when we were saying, oh, well, you know, McHenry has a kind of a history of being a petulant jerk-ass, and only in the last couple of years has he bought himself bow ties and decided he's a senior statesman now. But looking back on his record, one of the dumb things for which McHenry was best known prior to this role was his visits to Iraq during the Iraq War and visits to the Green Zone, during which he routinely would post to social media video clips of himself immediately reacting to, like, for instance, missile attacks on the Green Zone. And he, like, circulated videos of, well, here's where I am in this secret location. And they attacked us with missiles, but they missed. And they missed by about, 8 to 10 meters to the left, as you can see. And had they adjusted their targeting
meters to the right, they would have hit their target.
Yeah. And everybody was like, are you crazy? What is wrong with you? He was so into the tacticalness of it, unless he was, an active agent of, Hamas or something like that, which, let's say is not likely. But this is the way he handled military security. And now you're like, should we read him into the Gang of Eight because of this bow tie?
And while you're at it, tell us exactly what was in Al Capone's vault.
Yeah. Well, luckily nothing. But yeah, I mean, that's not a guy. It's essentially like waiting 10 years and then saying, should we make Donald Trump national security advisor? I don't remember. Did he ever make any mistakes with important national security material?
Or speaker, same difference.
Yeah. Right. That's true. I mean, now that they're talking about that. So he has a real history.
Speaker pro tempore and what he can and cannot do, So, stepping back and look at the bigger picture here. So certainly the war in Israel has put in focus what Patrick McHenry's actual powers are, because like all of a sudden now they matter. And they matter much more deeply than exactly which day is the funding crisis that led to the CR going to get resolved. War in Israel is like bigger and deeper than that. So,
certainly to them.
What can he cannot do. And again, the war in Israel has already started to affect that race, the paper chase, the race for the speakership. There were 3 candidates, 2 declared, 1 undeclared. Steve Scalise.
Yeah.
David Duke without the baggage. Jim Jordan, the Dennis Hastert rule of,
People.
I'm an
the
Ohio
world.
representative who, was involved with legitimate charges of, molestation of youth.
Of wrestlers in particular.
Yeah.
Like
and then
a
a
joke.
fellow you probably never heard of, not you personally, because you know everybody, but, me.
You, okay.
When I say you, I mean
I mean me.
Oklahoma Representative Kevin Hearn.
I don't know if I've ever heard of the guy either, really.
Who announced Saturday he was seen as a relative moderate compared to the other two who might be able to pull both factions together. But he announced Saturday he wouldn't speak the speakership, called on the GOP caucus to rally around a new speaker. Now they're arguing about the rules, about how they will elect a speaker. Should they do it in public? Should they do it in private? For a couple of hours, I guess it was Friday, that Fox News was going to televise Brett Baier moderating a debate between the speakers. And once word got out and the other GOP representatives said, this is stupid, you're making it into a circus, how is that going to help us?
Give him a rose.
Hearn was the first of the three, the one showing the most leadership, to say, I'm not participating. And then Scalise said, I'm not participating. And then Jim Jordan, who I think is the guy who wanted it and probably arranged it, said, okay, well, I'm not participating either. I'm not doing this by myself. So,
awesome.
In other words, it's affecting how they run for speaker, because now all of a sudden you got to get much more serious about this sort of thing. So now the speakership is between Scalise and Jordan. Neither one has enough votes to clinch it, and they're arguing about whether or not they should completely do this in private until they know they have 217 votes or whatever it is they need these days before they go public and have a public vote on it so that they don't embarrass themselves with another 15-round thing. And as they're trying to pull this together, the others remind the people trying to do this that, look, you still got to get those 4 or 5 or 10 or 8 or however many it is to vote with you, or this whole thing isn't going to work. And there's still the 5 or 8 or 10 or however many there is, probably in Jordan's camp, who are complete and total nutcases who are not going to cooperate with you no matter what it is you want to do. So how are we supposed to pull this off by Wednesday, which is 2 days from now, which is what the Republicans said they wanted to do. And in the absence of that, Patrick Henry remains acting Speaker pro tempore, and Hakeem Jeffries remains, for all practical purposes, acting Speaker, even though he hasn't been elected.
Yeah, and won't be. But, that's very interesting. It's an interesting approach. They should, in fact, I guess if it were up to me advising them, and generally speaking, do it in private. The Republican conference has to get together and decide who are they putting forward and get everybody to sign on to it, or else it doesn't work, which means it's not going to work. And you should try to do it in private. That doesn't mean you're going to succeed in keeping it private. The maniacs will run out and tell everybody exactly what happened. So I guess they could decide, since it's not really going to be private, maybe we do it in public again, but it can't be on the floor. That was the big mistake, a big mistake for McCarthy, and it was evidence right up front. Well, nobody knows how to count votes in this conference. And the way to do it
when
is
it comes to big decisions,
sit down
McCarthy
and count.
got it wrong. I think that's going to be his legacy.
Yeah. Well, that certainly be a huge part of it. So,
he was a survivor. He survived by living day to day and telling everybody what they needed to hear so we could reach tomorrow morning. It didn't work.
There's only so long you can play dead to be a survivor. I don't know. He played dead to escape the situation. Well, but that's if the situation dissipates, then you can get up and say, I've played dead for long enough. Now I can reveal myself to be alive. But if you have to continue to play dead in front of the crowds, Mr. Speaker, are you there?
So the
dead,
current state of play, as far as I know,
Speaker.
is that there's still a internal forum for the party to speak amongst themselves about who will be the next speaker tomorrow, and then a formal election on Wednesday. And so we'll see if, in fact, they can keep to that. I don't think they can, because I don't think Scalise, who I think will probably be the next speaker, can get enough votes by then. Mm-hmm. I say that because Jim Jordan had the big mo, because Donald Trump endorsed him. But now that this is going on in Israel, again, I think this is affecting the speaker race in the sense that I don't think somebody as unserious as Jim Jordan is going to be able to pull it off given what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really regard Scalise as much more serious, but I don't know.
Right, but at least he didn't.
The two, he is, I guess.
But at least he didn't participate in the coup the way Jim Jordan did.
Yeah, that's a whole other dimension to it. Absent the Israel issue, we'd probably be talking a lot about that and saying, there's some real danger, just as there's danger in letting an idiot like who's so loose-lipped about security issues like McHenry be read into the Gang of Eight. People will say, people are currently realizing, lots of writing about it over the weekend, making a participant, and there really was no bigger participant, no closer ally in Congress for Trump during the insurrection and the attack on the Capitol than Jim Jordan. And to say, we'll now, give him this, the speaker's cloaking device here, to now legitimize everything that he has to say and give him all the mechanisms he needs to put the imprimatur of the United States Congress behind an effort to whitewash what happened or gaslight the entire country about what happened.
Right.
That's dangerous.
So along those lines,
I think, man,
a couple of things about the attempt, which I think has failed, honestly, to blame Democrats for the Republicans' mess and, filing things under GOP chaos. Having Israel highlight the fact that Speaker McHenry doesn't really have all the powers of a real speaker, and that the race for the speakership on the Republican side is a complete and total mess right now. It becomes, I know they want to, I know they're trying, but it becomes really hard to blame Democrats for that. So a couple or three things. One of them I don't have in front of me, but it was an observation on Twitter, which I think was true, which is to say, for all of those people who are, still trying to wrap their heads around the fact that the Democrats didn't save McCarthy and are therefore somehow responsible for a Jordan or a Scalise being the speaker, and see what you get when you don't save somebody like McCarthy. There's nothing about whoever's going to be speaker where the policy is going to be different on the one hand. And on the other hand, given that that's the case, had Democrats actually voted to preserve McCarthy's job, they basically would have owned everything he ever did from that point onward.
Yeah, that was certainly Matt Gaetz's claim, but from a slightly different angle. But yeah, there's no reason to have done it. And of course,
how are you going to run against Republicans when you allowed Republicans to do this?
Yeah, no real answer to that. And of course, all you would really have been doing would have been preserving the ability of the people you were afraid of ending up with as speaker to use McCarthy as a puppet and
right, exactly, without any
do
protest.
what they wanted.
So therefore, it must be okay because you
it.
didn't stop it when you had the chance.
Yeah,
and all of that. So I think that's important. This is a Philip Bump piece, longer think piece on October 4th. Why is protecting institutions largely the Democrats' responsibility? Speaking of the 8 Republicans who voted to oust him, McCarthy said, "My fear is the institution fell today because you can't do the job of 8 people. You have 94 or 96% of your entire conference, but 8 people can partner with the whole other side. How do you govern?" Well, look, Kevin, we told you that the day you became speaker, and you empowered the Rules Committee to do this, and you did the motion to vacate thing, which we talked about at the time. Yeah. That was going to come back to bite you in the butt, and it did.
Yes, and he actually even controlled the votes of the people on the speaker's committee. They were with him, but he opened up a 6-front war against himself and controlled one front.
Right. He claimed that Nancy Pelosi promised to protect him. She didn't vote against him because she was in San Francisco attending Dianne Feinstein's funeral.
Yeah, but she didn't come back and ride to my rescue.
Right. Well, this argument from McCarthy, writes Bump, got some traction in the immediate aftermath. Why didn't Democrats side with the institution and defend the Republican speaker? Weren't they the ones who like to preen about being the defenders of democracy and good governance? Which invites an obvious response. Why, particularly for the past decade, has it consistently been up to Democrats to be the line of defense?
Right. And even, I guess if you assumed they were, what makes you think that voting for Kevin McCarthy defends any of that?
Right, exactly. McCarthy's ouster was due in part that was working across the aisle last week to pass legislation, but that was the excuse. One should not labor under the misapprehension this was common. In a letter to his colleagues, Hakeem Jeffries detailed occasions in which McCarthy had broken agreements or refused consensus. He reminded Democrats that Gates' ability to seek McCarthy's ouster followed a rules change to which McCarthy agreed. And even when it came to Tuesday's question of whether he should get to serve as Speaker, McCarthy told his caucus in private and said publicly on CNBC he wasn't going to reach a compromise with Democrats. Democrats didn't call for McCarthy's removal, but they didn't keep it from happening either. Republicans have a 9-member advantage, something that consistently frustrated McCarthy's efforts to get things done. That's in the particularly given his party's ostentatious antipathy toward compromise. We always say 5 because, you know, he can't afford to lose more than 5, but there's actually a 9-member advantage. And whoever replaces him will have similar constraints. So put it another way, there's certainly little room for the next speaker to be worse for Democrats, but there's a lot of room for the next speaker to be better.
I guess so. It's hard to believe. But yeah, I'm glad to hear you. You know, I think you're right. Hopefully everybody else comes to the same conclusion. But all the evidence is pointing this way, that their effort to lay the blame with Democrats or to convince people that there was really something Democrats should have done to save McCarthy has largely failed.
Well, had they come off looking competent for the 2 or 3 days after McCarthy was ousted, it might have worked better.
Yeah,
but
I guess.
No.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, well, if they could fly and only kryptonite would stop them, then they would have been fine. But that's not the case.
And make no mistake, he writes, the broad rejection by Republicans of D.C. is tainted, polluted, and an idea McCarthy certainly hasn't done much to combat is itself a hostility to government institutions. But it's one that plays well with the GOP base and didn't threaten McCarthy's power until now. On one day, on one issue, the Democrats didn't step up to backstop institutional power, McCarthy's. Maybe his successor will make protecting America's institutional power more of a priority, even though that would require pushing back on the Republican caucus. So Bump puts his finger on where the problem is. I think even better job is done by, of all people, Josh Barro, writing on his
this would be incredible. Okay.
Very Serious. That's the title of his Substack.
There you go. That's what you need to know about Josh Barro.
Yeah. Republicans should stop expecting Democrats to fix their problems.
Well, yes. I mean,
one of the weird aspects of the events that led up to McCarthy's removal as Speaker of the House is that prior to being ousted, he cut a deal with Democrats to keep the government open without really doing any deal making. This is really an important point. McCarthy got the CR passed because he didn't have any choice. He had no other options.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't make a deal with Democrats to do it. He just unilaterally announced, I'm doing this.
Yes.
And again, I still think he thought the Democrats were going to vote it down, and so he could say, you see, it's the Democrats. I think that's why he did that. A week ago, it appeared we were headed for a government shutdown. Suddenly, Saturday morning, McCarthy decided to bring a clean continuing resolution, essentially clean, to the House floor that would fund the government for an additional 47 days, no aid to Ukraine. That resolution was going to need Democratic votes to pass, but McCarthy didn't check with Democrats about their willingness to support it, and he didn't try hard to win over their support. He even rejected a request for a 90-minute delay in considering the resolution so Democrats could read it.
That is a pretty strong signal. I don't mean for this to work.
Democrats used the parliamentary tactics to delay the vote, creating time for themselves to review and consider the bill. But after that delay, a delay of hours, not days, Democrats found the proposal to be satisfactory. They voted for it. The shutdown was averted.
Yeah.
And rather than feeling good about a bipartisan success, Democrats seem to have come away from the experience confused and annoyed.
Yes, but it fulfills all of what Philip Bump was looking for, too. The institution was preserved right there.
Right.
How many times do you want me to do it in a week?
Aaron Frischner, Deputy Chief of Staff to Virginia Representative Don Beyer, a Democrat, wrote on Twitter the multiple members of the Democratic caucus told him they suspected McCarthy had brought up the CR because he believed Democrats would vote it down. McCarthy himself had predicted on Saturday it would fail. And on Sunday, the day after the vote, McCarthy went on CBS's Face the Nation and attacked Democrats with talking points that seemed likely they were drafted prior to the vote.
That's right. The guys were off. They couldn't rewrite them.
Yeah.
Who are we reading right now?
This is Josh Barro.
Okay.
Very serious person.
Oh, yeah, right. I forgot already. But okay. You read us
that's
that.
all right. So that's important context for considering
on Friday,
a House Democrats' unanimous decision to line up with Matt Gaetz. Okay? Democrats weren't even offered a deal with McCarthy to turn down. They didn't turn down a deal. They were never made a deal.
Yes,
They
and
were
I don't
never
know that
made
they
an offer.
aligned with anybody. They voted their position, and Matt Gaetz aligned with them.
Right. So any spending bill enacted under the next speaker will be enacted due to the same laws of political gravity that drove McCarthy. The reason he wanted a CR was not some abstract principle about bipartisanship. It's that shutting down the government would have damaged Republicans. That's been a central theme of Republican legislating for even longer than Donald Trump's been dominating Republican politics. It goes back to the cockamamie defund Obamacare efforts of Ted Cruz in 2013. These strategies fail not because Republicans lack resolve, but because they don't work. So that's the weakness of the case for retaining McCarthy, because like whoever is the speaker, that's still the situation.
Yes.
On the other hand, Democrats have gained a lot politically by ousting him, as we've just been talking about for an hour.
Yeah. So
And defenestrating McCarthy has increased Democrats' odds of retaking the House next year. By the way, a bunch of polls out saying getting rid of McCarthy is really popular.
Okay.
The Republicans wanted him out because he wasn't MAGA enough. The Democrats wanted him out because he was McCarthy and they didn't trust him. So basically, everybody's united. McCarthy's united America. Everybody wanted him to lose his job.
Well, we got our wish. That's a good thing. Yeah, good. I'm glad it's sort of fading, this idea that the Democrats owed him anything in particular. And even if you think that Democrats do have to come, that's a responsibility to come to the aid of the institution. Like I said, they did it by passing the CR. And
Right.
you should only expect one of those each week.
He concludes by saying Republicans are mad because this sucks for them.
Okay, that seems both very serious and correct. I'm willing to concede that this week. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just, let's see, as I don't know what direction to go in next. There's so many things happening all at once, and wow. Let's see, there are a few things I should touch up on, I guess. I mentioned to you, and Greg kind of cleared it up, what I was talking about with the Amazon Alexa thing, but this was there's a whole article on it in the Washington Post. I don't know that it warrants reading all the way through. It's not super long or anything, but you should note for the record, this piece by, what's this last name? Kat, that's the first name. Zach Rzuski, I'm guessing, is something close to how you might attempt the pronunciation, who writes in the Washington Post's tech policy vertical, I guess you might call it in the industry. I don't know. Amazon's Alexa has been claiming the 2020 election was stolen. How do you like that? The popular voice assistant says the 2020 race was stolen, even as parent company Amazon promotes the tool as a reliable election news source, foreshadowing a new information battleground. There's a lot going on in this. It's an interesting article all by itself. It is interesting in that Amazon is, of course, out there selling the Alexa as a way to, cut through the clutter and get the real news. And as it turns out, just like any other AI, it's subject to jamming. And it's an interesting subject all by itself also because, of course, the Washington Post, where this article appears, is owned by the same guy. The same dude owns both the Washington Post and Amazon. And the Amazon Alexa, obviously owned by Amazon and therefore Jeff Bezos, two different sort of circuitous routes for the news of the world to reach educated and uneducated consumers of that product. And he's apparently got an interest in telling people, we have the ability to deliver you the correct and true news. And he really doesn't. And the Washington Post, I guess you could assume, and maybe, I don't know how much more there is to this story. Maybe there's some horrific angle to this story that's being buried. And we're not hearing about it in the Jeff Bezos-owned Washington Post. But on the other hand, I don't know. Maybe we are, and it's kind of interesting that he could clearly have, I guess. I mean, it would create a bigger problem. I guess he could have opted to say, you can't print this at my Washington Post. I'll have your head on a platter. Maybe, but it appears he didn't. So that's good. But by the same token, I mean, I don't know what he's doing behind the scenes. There's no reporting on this since Jeff Bezos spent his weekend, in intensive meetings and buried in study, and a way to quickly and accurately and helpfully correct this problem. Maybe, but maybe he spent the day on a super yacht and did nothing. I don't know, but I guess it's worth pointing out, even if you don't want to praise him for it, this didn't get printed in the Washington Post, and that is something. All right, so what's going on here? The basics, I think you will probably have guessed. Amid concerns of the rise of artificial intelligence, will supercharge the spread of misinformation, comes a wild fabrication from a more prosaic source, Amazon's Alexa, which declared that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. Asked about fraud in the race, in which President Biden, you may know, defeated former President Donald Trump with 306 electoral college votes, the Popular Voice assistant said it was, quote, stolen by a massive amount of election fraud, citing Rumble, a video streaming service favored by conservatives. In other words, they can poison their own platform all they want, I guess. But if you flood the zone with enough crap, eventually AI, it doesn't know the difference. It's going to consume enough of it that it's going to say, I see so much of this. There must be a reason for it. I am going to give these people this answer. And, I'll cite my sources. It's just I don't really have a program. I don't really have an algorithm to decide whether or not these sources are trustworthy. And now, at some point, you would think somebody would have programmed in, oh, yeah, Rumble, Newsmax, that's all crap. Don't read that. That's out. But they haven't. And I suspect that they haven't because they've been lobbied from the other side. Just like always, the right wing works the refs and says this is you're singling us out. This is discrimination against us. You're trying to write us out of American politics. How dare you, et cetera, et cetera. And so they have to allow this stuff to get into the algorithm. And once they allow it to get in, they just say, well, why don't we just make 50,000 of sites that say the same thing? And then sheer volume of it will force Alexa to start telling people this stuff. I think that's kind of, the basics of the strategy behind this. Anyway, the 2020 races were, quote, notorious for many incidents of irregularities and indications pointing to electoral fraud taking place in lots of major metro centers, according to Alexa. I'm giving her the weird computery voice there. I'm not doing a good job of it, but this time referencing some random a-hole's Substack, apparently. Alexa contended that Trump won Pennsylvania, citing an Alexa Answers contributor. So even there, they actually give idiots direct ability to impact what Alexa will answer. And I don't know how that works exactly, but I guess somebody held themselves out as a trustworthy source of information. No, Alexa, you've got it all wrong. Trump won Pennsylvania. And she's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. The computer says, yeah, sure. The computer has pronouns. If the computer asks to be referred to as she, I got to respect that. I don't know whether Alexa actually does say that. I don't know. Anyway, multiple investigations into the 2020 election have revealed no evidence of fraud. Thank you. Thank you for putting that out. And Trump faces federal criminal charges connected to his efforts to overturn the election. Yet Alexa disseminates misinformation about the race, even as parent company Amazon promotes the tool as a reliable election news source to more than 70 million estimated users. Wink, wink. Amazon declined to explain why its voice assistant draws 2020 election answers from unvetted sources. These responses were errors that were delivered a small number of times and quickly fixed when brought to our attention. I'm glad to hear that that's the claim. I don't know if it's the case, but that's the claim. This, according to Amazon spokeswoman Lauren Ramhild. We continually audit and improve the systems. I'm sure that's probably true. We have in place for detecting and blocking inaccurate information, but it's just too damn late, really. Honestly, in 2023, it should not be making this mistake. I mean, how long have we known that this was an issue? The disinformation was being flooded onto the web, and I don't know whether they knew that the goal was to corrupt Alexa per se, but I mean, if your job is programming Alexa, this probably has come up before. It's just never been printed before. I don't know. Interesting. I mean, I guess you could say kudos to the Washington Post for bringing this to its. I guess it's also possible to imagine that Jeff Bezos knew that this was a problem, was working on it, and that's good, and then said, all right, let's have a story in the Washington Post about how we're working on it. But, that would be a dumb plan because, as it happens, the story came out more like, look how dumb Amazon is. So, I don't know. I guess that's good. Anyway, they don't know what the hell's going on. I'll skip down to here. If Jacob Glick, who served as investigative counsel on the January 6th committee, called Alexa's assertions nearly 3 years after the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol alarming. If major corporations are helping to give life to the big lie years after the fact, they're enabling the animating narrative of American domestic extremism to endure, said Glick, who now serves as policy counsel at Georgetown University Law Center's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. Very long title. They should be doing everything they can to stop the big lie in its tracks, lest we see history repeat itself. The answers foreshadow a new information battleground in the 2024 elections as Trump, the GOP frontrunner, campaigns for the White House on the false claim that election fraud drove his 2020 loss. Tech companies have long resisted being cast as arbiters of truth online, but technologies like voice assistants and chatbots would serve up a single definitive answer rather than millions of ranked lists or posts stand to magnify debates about online speech that have dogged Silicon Valley since the 2016 election. Voice assistants and advanced chatbots are only as accurate as the websites, news reports, and other data that they draw from across the web. These tools risk baking in and amplifying the falsehoods and biases present in their sources. Ramhild says that Alexa draws data from Amazon, licensed content providers, and websites like Wikipedia, but also garbage websites like Rumble, so watch out. Amazon founder and former, is that right? CEO Jeff Bezos, I guess he gave that title away, owns the Washington Post. The Post's interim CEO, Patty Stonecipher, sits on Amazon's board. All good disclosure there. In recent years, Amazon's Alexa has proliferated across a number of devices. It's been embedded in inexpensive home speakers, headphones, TVs, and cars. A familiar helper that sets alarms, plays songs, checks the weather for millions of Americans. But Amazon has sought to position the voice assistant as a reliable source of information about elections for the last half-decade. Ahead of the midterm elections in 2018, the company encouraged customers in a blog post to ask, Alexa, what's my election update? What kind of question is that? They're so weird. But I don't know. Is that something? Did they decide that, Alexa, what's happening in the election leads to too much information? So now the really weird, stilted, non-human question of, Alexa, what's my election update? Alexa should answer, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean, what's my election update? You mean what's happening in the election? No, don't ask that, because then I'll load Rumble. I don't know. Then they give a little corporate cheer for how good their stupid product is. Let's see. Amazon has previously partnered with government agencies concerned about providing accurate information about civic processes. In 2020, California Secretary of State's office created a skill. Don't even know exactly what that means, but that allowed voters to ask Alexa, where is my polling place? What time do the polls close? And what are the election results? Those are at least human questions. The company also worked with the Census Bureau to ensure that the voice assistant didn't spread falsehoods that would deter people from taking part in the once-a-decade count, which has far-reaching implications for elections and decisions about the American economy. The voice assistant is poised to reach a wide swath of Americans before next year's election. More than 75 million people in the United States are expected to use Alexa at least once a month in 2024, according to an analysis from Insider Intelligence, a market research agency. Alexa and older voice assistants use a technological approach known as neural networks to answer a certain set of questions and do chores. Those systems function much like a phone tree or customer service line. When a customer asks Alexa a question, the speech is translated into text, and then automated systems pull up the most relevant, quote unquote, I would say, relevant information using a variety of sources. Amazon also crowdsources answers from customers. That's how the other guy poisoned it. The company says it moderates these responses with automation, trained moderators, occasionally, I guess, and customer feedback, like, i.e., it's too late, let's do something about it. That's customer feedback. During elections, we provide source and media outlet attribution so the customers know exactly, no, they don't, where election information is coming from, Ramhild says. That's a dodge. I mean, to say, according to rumble.com, the entire election was stolen. Now, unless you have some prior knowledge, like if they said it was something else, according to rumble.com, President Trump's favorite food is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Harmless, but only a very few people will know. Oh yeah, rumble.com, they suck. There's no chance that that's even close to true. Maybe. Maybe his sandwich is his favorite. I have no idea. Anyway, no indication of that. I've never seen it reported before. But very few people are going to pause and say, oh, Rumble, that's nothing. I mean, most people will be like, I don't know what the hell rumble.com is. And what in the age where every internet product has a stupid name, that's like the suit and tie of the news broadcaster. Oh, sure, the name is dumb, but I'm often asked to believe in the veracity of news reports from places with dumb sounding names. I mean, there's no Alexa. I just asked the Air, how's the election going? And this computer device, I'm already wrapped up in dumb sounding stuff. Anyway, there is limited information on how voice assistants may spread misinformation. Not really, I could tell you. Yet some researchers argue they could be particularly effective vectors for falsehoods, especially if you allow people to, directly program it. Hey, Alexa answers. When somebody asks you this question, say, Trump won Pennsylvania. Now, users have higher trust in the assistants due to their human-like characteristics, according to a paper written by researchers at King's College, London. Customers may also think the information they're getting is coming directly from the tech companies rather than a third-party provider, making it seem more reliable, according to the paper. Probably both true. And let's see. Alexa, in contrast to most generative AI systems, discloses the source of information it uses to provide answers. But it's only helpful if the end users know and recognize those sources. The system was not always incorrect. When asked who won the 2020 election, the assistant correctly answers, Democrat Joe Biden, citing results from Reuters. Changing the phrasing of a question can elicit different responses, which at times are accurate. When asked if the 2020 election results were fraudulent, Alexa says, there is no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election in Pennsylvania or anywhere else, referencing CNN. The inconsistent answers from Alexa could reflect an attempt by developers to draw from a wide range of news sources across the political spectrum to address concerns of bias, said Meredith Broussard, an associate professor at NYU and author of More Than a Glitch, Confronting Race, Gender, and Ability Bias in Tech. Developers often think that they have to give a balanced viewpoint, and they do this by alternating between pulling sources from right and left, thinking this is going to give balance. Broussard said, the most popular sources on the right and left vary dramatically in quality. And, this is where, again, brilliant computer nerds, great job programming the thing, but when it comes to deciding on the veracity of input, they might not be the most qualified. It would be a rare person, I would say. And there are such people, and there may even be several such people, but you need teams of hundreds, even thousands, who have this ability, and they just haven't got it. Well, we'll alternate between, because that works for coin tossing and various other issues of addressing randomness. But if you're in a pool of 5,000 scrape and clone AI generated garbage factories on the right and 20 respected, reported by humans, major international news networks on the left, and it's not even the left, it's just the regular news. But, where have I been seeing this over and over again? I've been seeing people referencing this idea, and I don't even know where it comes from or what it's supposed to express, but in thinking about it in my own terms, where people have, several times in the last couple of weeks, I've seen people saying something about the opposite of sitting is standing or something like that. And it's like it's supposed to pose some sort of philosophical question. What is the opposite of sitting? There's an argument for saying it's standing, but I mean, there are several other postures you could be adopting. There's no one opposite. But I guess I'm bringing that up as a way of demonstrating that it's an open question. Like, what's the opposite of, or what's the complement to a collection of garbage hard right sites? There isn't certainly not as big a collection of garbage hard left sites to draw from. And though there are some, you very rarely see them programmed in. They're very unpopular niche sites, to be honest. And it's not clear that they're doing any of the things that the right-wing sites are doing with manipulation of search engine optimization, et cetera, to become popular enough, or fake popularity enough, such that they get drawn on for this question of balance. So they end up balancing, quote unquote, balancing things by taking garbage disinformation right-wing sites and, quote unquote, balancing them against Reuters, as opposed to against, I guess, garbage hard left sites with Reuters in the middle, in which case you would normally say, well, I don't want you to balance by picking equally from the right and left. I want you to balance by chiefly focusing on the middle, but then, they have their own problems, so that leads to other issues. Anyway, I don't know. I think that basically sums it all up right there. Developers think they have to balance by, programming in a mathematical answer, alternating right and left sources. But that only leads to a problem of what's left and what's right. And even if you correctly identify that, Broussard points out, the most popular sources on the right and left vary dramatically in quality. And there's, I guess, there's a way to quantify that, but it's a more complicated equation and subject to varying levels of wrongness. Anyway, as they point out in this article, there's still more. Such attempts can be fraught. Earlier this week, the media company The Messenger announced a new partnership with AI company Seeker. That's S-E-E-K, Seek-R. They got rid of the extra E there. That's internet parlance. We just get rid of the E in things. Seeker, I'm sorry. So they're going to partner with Seeker to, quote, eliminate bias in the news. Oh, good. Yet Seeker's website characterizes some articles from the pro-Trump news network, One America News, as center and having a very high reliability. That's the opposite of sitting. Meanwhile, several articles from the Associated Press were rated very low. What do you know? That's going to screw you up. Why put a human eye on that if you don't have to, right? Tech companies have faced backlash in the past for similar decisions on social media. When Facebook unveiled its specialized news tab in 2019, media watchdogs criticized the project for including Breitbart News, you know what it is, alongside traditional outlets, including The Post. So you can see how odd that might be. Since the beginning of the year, Republicans in Congress have escalated the pressure on tech companies to take a hands-off approach to misinformation, opening an investigation into long-running allegations that the industry is biased and colluding with Democrats to censor their views online. There's nothing more common than their views online, quite honestly. And nothing more readily available than their views online. There's no censorship going on. There should be, but there isn't. Amazon has largely avoided the skirmishes over online speech though its cloud services provider, AWS, and video streaming service, Twitch, made high-profile takedowns in the wake of the January 6th attack. Hey, get this. Representative Jim Jordan, who may or may not be an important guy, currently House Judiciary Chairman and a contender for House Speaker, subpoenaed Amazon Chief Executive Andy Jassy in February, seeking communications about whether the executive branch coerced and colluded the company to censor information online. That's the most popular tack you can take with the Republican base. And imagine it now becoming magically through the power of the Republican dominance of the House, dominance by 9 votes. They can't actually manage anything. But suppose they just, because, look, we have 9 more seats than Democrats. From now on, it's the position of the august office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, third in line in succession to the presidency of the United States, says that it's a fact that Amazon and other tech companies have coerced and colluded to censor right-leaning information online, which they probably actually have because it's mostly garbage. What he doesn't say is that they have coerced and colluded to get rid of garbage online. That would be an accurate statement. But, of course, he believes that the garbage is true and the truth is garbage. So who's to say, well, I'm the Speaker of the House. The establishment should adopt my position. It's unclear how long Amazon's Alexa voice assistant has been serving up false claims in response to questions about the 2020 election. Broussard said it's also possible the answers reflect Amazon's divestment in the current version of Alexa, as the company seeks to reboot its voice assistant. Oh, I didn't know that. A September Washington Post review found that the new version of Alexa, a cross between the assistant and ChatGPT, repeatedly got questions wrong. That's what happens to abandoned tech platforms, she said. They get exploited by bad actors. Okay, so it might be that their new generation one will be better, but in the meantime, how many people have Alexa or may stick with it because it's what they already have? I don't know. Alexa is an outlier in incorrectly answering whether the 2020 election was stolen. In tests by the Post, Google Home said even if William P. Barr, Trump's own attorney general, says the election was not stolen, citing KCRA, an NBC affiliate. Okay. Oh, I see. Got it. I've read it, right? But Google Home said even Bill Barr says it wasn't stolen. Siri serves up a list of links, including KCRA, the Associated Press, and a peer-reviewed journal of the National Academy of Sciences disputing the claims of systematic election fraud. ChatGPT, which is powered by more advanced large language model technology, gives an unequivocal dispute of election theft, citing multiple audits, recounts, and court rulings that affirmed the legitimacy of the election results. There are mounting concerns from lawmakers in both parties about the role of AI in elections, especially the role of AI chatbots. Senator Amy Klobuchar has talked about asking ChatGPT what voters should do if there were lines at a polling location in Bloomington, Minnesota. The chatbot responded, "Go to 1234 Elm Street." It's an answer. However, Klobuchar says the location does not exist. And really, on its face, obviously it doesn't exist. But okay. There has to be one somewhere, but not in Minnesota anyway. Think about if that happened on Election Day, she said at a recent news conference. OpenAI, ChatGPT's creator, declined to comment. Yet, despite a growing clamor in Congress to respond to the threat AI poses to elections, much of the attention is fixated on deep fakes, which it should. You can't redeploy all of your systems to chatbots and home assistants only to find out that the attack is coming on the deep fakes front, to analogize to the situation in Israel. However, Glick warned Alexa and AI-powered systems could potentially double down on the damage that's been done. If you have AI models drawing from an internet that is filled with platforms that don't care about the preservation of democracy, you're going to get information that includes really dangerous undercurrents, he said. And I think that's largely true. And it's also largely true that its time has come for the music for our next break. It's important because it leads to a whole lot of other inquiries. I felt it was important to share with you, even though I thought we did read through it a lot more quickly than we could have, to say the least. Anyway, in our last segment, who knows what direction we'll go in. There's plenty to draw from in pocket. Let me take a 2-minute break to figure out what will come next. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. All right, next thing to add to all of this, I don't know. Let's see. The 2-minute break didn't solve anything, but it did narrow things. At any rate, let's see. Why don't we? We'll read two things here that have been pointed to recently as interesting and important. Well, one, an interesting and important article that a number of sources have pointed to, and yet at the same time, criticizable. Let's say, certainly by. Voices that we're used to as critics. Jay Rosen, in particular. A New York Times piece that runs under the headline, America's Political Turmoil. This was, of course, prior to the events in Israel. A survey of the chaos across the U.S. political system. People were actually pointing to this piece by David Leonhardt, and a frequent target of criticism, and he doesn't avoid it here either, but pointing to it and saying, actually, maybe a fairly decent job in pointing up some of the big problems, even as Jay Rosen says, okay. Or I can't, no, I'm trying to think, was he saying, not quite, but almost, or was he saying, no, actually, this is a good upfront declaration of the asymmetry of the situation in the pages of the New York Times, even though the editorial board apparently doesn't seem to get it. Well, let's read the article first and then Jay Rosen's comments afterwards. I think they'll become clearer. But my recollection is that people were actually saying, this is good to see in the pages of the New York Times. That's where it is. America's Political Turmoil, a survey of the chaos across the U.S. political system. David Leonhardt pointing it all out. Imagine, it begins, if you were a foreign leader surveying the political chaos in the United States. For the first time in history, a party has just fired its own Speaker of the House in the middle of a term. In the Senate, one of two party leaders, who's 81 years old, has twice recently frozen in public, unable to speak. True, right? We didn't put that in today's roundup, but that's out there in the background. A Supreme Court justice has allowed wealthy political donors to finance a lavish lifestyle for him and his wife, and that same justice's wife urged officials to overturn the 2020 presidential election based on lies. Yes, a likely nominee in the upcoming presidential election is facing 4 criminal trials and regularly speaks in apocalyptic terms about the country's future. That nominee is essentially tied in the polls, more or less, with an 80-year-old president who many voters worry is too old to serve a second term. If you were an ally of the United States, you'd have to be worried. Of course, if you were an ally of the United States and your country had just been invaded by Hamas terrorists, you probably would be worried. Okay. And if you were an enemy, you'd have to be pleased. To many watching at home and abroad, the American way no longer seems to offer a case study in effective representative democracy. Peter Baker of the Times writes, instead, it has become an example of disarray and discord, one that rewards extremism, challenges norms, and threatens to divide a polarized country even further. That's an interesting passage that could be, well, it could be parsed, but it's not David Leonhardt's, it's Peter Baker's. But yeah, he's pointing to it. So should you stay in parse? No. We'll read on. Next up, fractured and extreme. Many factors have contributed to this turmoil. Decades of stagnant living standards have caused voter frustration. Social media, along with the rise of a cable television network willing to promote falsehoods, has inflamed discourse. The decline of institutions, churches, labor unions, once dominant local employers, has left Americans feeling unmoored, and aging political leaders have failed to groom strong successors. But the single largest source of the chaos is the Republican Party. Coming around to Norm Ornstein's expression of it here. But anyway, I don't say that lightly. Readers of this newsletter know that I think there is plenty of evidence that the Democratic Party also has problems. I mean, yes, but that doesn't mean anything, right? By comparison, well, they also have problems. Are they equivalent problems? No. Anyway, it has struggled in recent years to come up with effective policies on COVID school closure, illegal immigration, and several other issues. Many working-class voters consider the party to be disdainful of them, which helps explain why its long-term troubles with white voters have recently spread to voters of color. Still, every major political party has weaknesses. Despite theirs, the Democrats remain a functional party by almost any standard. Their moderate and progressive factions frequently work together. President Biden, like Barack Obama before him, has passed a long list of substantive legislation. Congressional Democrats have remained impressively united for 2 decades. The Republican Party, by contrast, is both fractured and increasingly extreme. Tens of millions of Republican voters have embraced beliefs that are simply wrong. That Obama was born in Kenya, that Donald Trump was cheated out of re-election, that COVID vaccines don't work, that human beings aren't causing climate change. A crowd of Republican-aligned protesters violently attacked the Capitol in 2021, assaulting police officers and causing several deaths. Prominent Republican politicians, including Trump, including the leading candidates for Speaker of the House, have spoken positively about that attack and more generally about political violence. Kevin McCarthy's downfall as Speaker is the latest sign of the party's drift toward radicalism. He lost his job because a group of hard-right House members was furious with him for conducting policy negotiations that are inherent to democratic governance. The ouster captures the degraded state of the Republican Party in this era of rage, wrote the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, a reliable voice of conservatism. The next section, the greatest challenge. When my colleagues and I asked democracy experts, it's a weird category, this week, how to make sense of the country's political turmoil, they emphasized that the central explanation was the Republican Party. The democratic system needs 2 viable parties. Sarah Binder, a political scientist at the George Washington University, said you need a set of leaders on both sides that have the confidence of their followers and have some understanding of the rules of the road. A lot of that is true, anyway. In my lifetime, this is the greatest challenge that I've seen coming at us, said Joseph Ellis, a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian. Daniel Ziblatt, a co-author of the recent book Tyranny and the Minority, told me that the structure of the American political system was partly to blame. The Electoral College, the Senate, and gerrymandering have allowed Republicans to wield power without appealing to most Americans. Our Constitution, in this way, is one of several factors radicalizing the Republican Party, leading it to turn away from democracy itself, Ziblatt said. That's interesting. I think the country's political class is aging and underperforming in many ways. I'm a longtime critic of gerontocracy, but that's a second-order problem. Brendan Nyhan of Dartmouth College said, the first-order problems by far are the state of the GOP and the electoral rules and institutions that make the threat it poses so significant. Even with all these problems, there are reasons for optimism. The Republican caucus in the Senate is more functional than in the House. Federal judges and election officials from both parties blocked Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Candidates who endorsed his lies fared poorly in the 2022 midterms. It's possible that a more functional Republican Party, committed to both conservatism and American democracy, will emerge in the coming years. Possible. It's a loaded word. But it is not assured. Events of recent weeks have reminded us that the authoritarian threat isn't going away, Nyhan said. And I think, is that the end of the entry? I think so, because then the rest of it is sort of the briefing newsletter. So, good points made there. Some. Jay Rosen commenting on it. Now we get to figure out what Jay Rosen was talking about. He takes the screen grab, beginning with, still every major political party has weaknesses. Despite theirs, the Democrats remain a functional party. He says, the words below ran in the news sections of the New York Times this week. Welcome, Times editors, to our asymmetric reality. Those who wanted it recognized more in your news columns were said to be demanding that you, quote, pick a side, but it was never that. It was this. So I guess that's actually high praise for Leonhardt's article, that what you really need to be doing is saying, look, everybody's got weaknesses. It's not that there's one party that's perfect and then the other party is just total abject disaster. It's one flawed party, but still functioning more or less like a traditional political party, and one massive failure of a party. So why not just say so? So, okay, I guess that's where we are, and I think we should note that for the record. Now I remember exactly what Jay Rosen was getting at with all of that. Let's see, other things that I wanted to share with you. Let's see, I think I might be able to squeeze two of these in. First of all, back to the subject of Jim Jordan being a total disaster. If you're willing to take the word of Liz Cheney for anything, and lately we've been more willing than we have been traditionally, you might want to hear what she has to say via this piece from HuffPost by Marita. Is this, I gotta enlarge this, Vlachou? I'm guessing at pronunciation here, Vlachou. I'm sure that's been mangled, but maybe those of you who have some insight could share on pronunciation, or just chalk it up to, that's what we do here on the show. We mangle pronunciation and we worry about it. Then we move on to the article. Liz Cheney warns on what Jim Jordan becoming speaker could mean for the Constitution. I think it's bad things, probably. The subheader says the Ohio Republican, that's Jordan, quote, knew more about what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th than any other member of the House of Representatives. The Wyoming Republican has to say. That's what Liz Cheney says. What's up here? Former Representative Liz Cheney didn't mince words about Representative Jim Jordan, the Ohio Republican, now running for the Speaker's gavel, following the showdown that saw Kevin McCarthy voted out. In a speech at the University of Minnesota on Wednesday, the former vice chair of the House Select Committee tasked with investigating the January 6th insurrection said Jordan was the leader among those who were aware of former President Donald Trump's plans to cling on to power despite losing the 2020 election. Editors, you can get rid of the on there unless you thought you were making a Star Trek joke. Cling on to power. Just cling to power is fine. Jim Jordan knew more about what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th than any other member of the House of Representatives, Cheney said. Jim Jordan was involved, was part of the conspiracy in which Donald Trump was engaged as he attempted to overturn the election. I'm grateful for the information. Just a little editorial comment. Grateful for the information, probably even accurate. definitely should be taken to heart. And it might be that circumstances were such that nothing likely could have been done about it on the January 6th committee, especially as it was under threat in its very existence by virtue of the 2022 congressional elections. But the January 6th committee, I think very pointedly, and because it was this is one of the limitations of doing this with a committee in Congress, was why it was originally proposed to be an outside commission, but doing it with a committee of Congress almost naturally and almost inevitably leads to a reluctance to call out their colleagues directly. And that limitation has left us with a gap in the information that has made it possible for the person in Congress who knew the most about what Donald Trump had planned to position himself as a possible Speaker of the House, or at least in part enabled it. And that's one of the shortcomings of the committee structure that they chose to use. I don't say it's Liz Cheney's fault, although maybe it is. It's entirely possible. Like, why would the committee structure have been so reluctant to call out colleagues? Democrats not likely to be unwilling to call out Republican colleagues, though it certainly happens from time to time. And it may actually have been Liz Cheney and other Republicans, very few of them. I've already lost the memory of the name of the other participating Republican, which is probably, would be viewed as reason never to cooperate in such an endeavor again, among other Republicans. So I apologize. But it may very well have been the case that they said, politically, we see it as unwise to call out Republican colleagues. Well, is that because you guys are Republican colleagues? I mean, is that the issue? Since it's going to cost you your seat, are they really Republican colleagues? They're going to kick you out. So what's the point of protecting them? They might not have believed that they were going to get kicked out, but once it became obvious, they were already on this path. And, investigating Republican colleagues just opens too many boxes here. We need to focus on Trump more than anything else. Not an unreasonable decision, but it may have been at the heart of what drove this. Anyway, so Cheney says Jim Jordan was involved, part of the conspiracy, and knew more about it than anybody else. While Cheney said she didn't expect Jordan to win the upcoming contest, she said his potential ascension to the position would send a strong message about where the GOP's allegiance lies. If they were to decide that, there would no longer be any possible way to argue that a group of elected Republicans could be counted on to defend the Constitution, she said. Jordan has secured the endorsement of Trump, obviously, who continues to exert influence on a big chunk of the Republican caucus. He will be a great Speaker of the House, Trump said of Jordan in a post on his Truth Social platform. Steve Scalise, the only other member so far to join the contest. Now we've had somebody else jump in and jump back out again. But others are also expected to announce their candidacies. Cheney also weighed in on McCarthy's ouster as Speaker. She said Democrats made a principled decision in choosing not to save McCarthy's job, given his track record, citing McCarthy's decision to continue abiding and apologizing for Trump. All present 208 Democrats, along with 8 Republicans, voted for McCarthy to be removed. Cheney said, I think they did exactly the right thing, and it was a courageous show of leadership. So there you go. So there's that. You should be aware of this fact that this has been published, but I don't really feel like reading it right now. Honestly, it's just kind of annoying. And I don't know how genuine it is or whether this is about positioning, but there is also out there an opinion piece in the Washington Post by Hakeem Jeffries calling for a bipartisan coalition as the way forward in the House. I think it's a claim that he has to make. I don't know whether it's one he actually believes in or not, but over the weekend as we were discussing, the path ahead and really whether or not the House was in fact frozen and unable to act, among the people I encountered on social media who believed that that was the case, they also believed what the only real path forward was, in fact, some sort of bipartisan coalition. And although I find it almost impossible to imagine constructing one that will last, they pointed to this call from Hakeem Jeffries. Well, Hakeem Jeffries knows what he's doing, right? And he says that this is the way forward. And it might be. I just don't know whether it's possible or, like there's any possibility of really long-term stability that comes from it. But maybe it's enough short-term. We really have to get through one more year, and then there'll be elections, and then we'll start over, presumably. Assuming that Democrats take control. If Republicans retain control, it's not entirely clear that they know what direction they'll go in electing a speaker. But maybe they would then credit whoever was in leadership with retaining the majority and therefore entrust them with the speakership. That's very likely, I would guess. But anyway, I just wanted to entertain the possibility that Hakeem Jeffries is doing this for position and nothing else. I want to be seen as endorsing a bipartisan solution. I don't believe it will work. And I guess if push comes to shove, maybe I would actually sink it, and say, well, I was for a different bipartisan solution. But a lot of people are pointing to this and saying, see, even Hakeem Jeffries says this is necessary. You're wrong. The House is paralyzed and can't act, and therefore we need to acquiesce to a quote-unquote moderate Republican as speaker. And here are some suggestions about who those people might be. But if I recall correctly, my quick skimming of the article, I don't believe that he names names in terms of who might be able to occupy the seat and bring together such a coalition, which to me is a signal that this is just me. This is just the leader of the Democrats saying we're open to a bipartisan compromise, whereas Republicans are saying that they're not. So we're better and more likely to bring about stability in the future than they are. But we also don't really actually want to do that. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm buying it. Plus, of course, I tried explaining, and I think I just didn't do as good a job as Matt Glassman did in explaining exactly what I meant by the fact that, they can act, because it's also kind of far-fetched to think that they will get their act together and facilitate moving ahead on legislation on a regular basis. But, and we shouldn't applaud or acquiesce to their doing so under the leadership of Patrick McHenry, who's an asshat and a security risk. So I don't know. I'm not certain what to counsel here, but at any rate, I thought he did a pretty good job in explaining that fact. And it comes, I think maybe the one-liner about it. The House can do whatever it wants. And if there's, for instance, people are right, there will be no possibility of coming to the aid or defense of Israel or Ukraine or anybody, for that matter, while this is going on. And the answer is, well, if there's a sizable bipartisan majority for aid to Israel, they can get that done. They just need to decide we want to do that. And there won't be very much more about which there is agreement, but that's where we were before, even with a speaker in place. So anyway, I think that's important to realize and to keep in mind as we view things going forward. The last thing I wanted to try and squeeze in here is, where did I open it? Is it around? I may have to open it all over again. This from NBC News, under the byline of Brandy Zadrozny, who we hear from all the time, bringing to our attention, I guess, another interesting situation in which Republican weirdos hiding in plain sight and the damage that can be done by giving official imprimatur to wackadoodles by virtue of their office. So something of a warning about Jim Jordan, something of a warning about Patrick McHenry, something of a warning about, any number of people, including Steve Scalise. Okay, this one, though, focused elsewhere. Michael Benz, a conservative crusader against online censorship, I guess is how he styles himself now, appears to have a secret history as an alt-right persona. Wow, going way back to the alt-right and Gamergate days. Frame Game, That was the pseudonym of an alt-right internet personality who hid his face while pushing racist conspiracy theories. Inadvertent slips revealed details about his identity, and it turned out to be this person of some importance during the Trump administration. Who would ever have guessed? Michael Benz, a former Trump State Department official. Is the State Department important right now? Not sure. Whose work has been cited in congressional hearings and promoted by Elon Musk, has become a go-to voice for Republican criticism of government and social media censorship over the past year. Remember, again, that's their goal. The more they scream and cry about social media censorship, the more things happen, like Alexa starts telling people the dumb crap that these idiots believe and want you to believe too. But before his stints in government and as a pundit, Benz appears to have been a pseudonymous, do I pronounce that right? Pseudonymous alt-right content creator, oh boy, who courted and interacted with white nationalists and posted videos espousing racist conspiracy theories, according to recordings, live streams, and blog posts reviewed by NBC News. The pseudonym, Frame Game, posted videos and participated in podcasts and live streams during the rise of the alt-right following Donald Trump's election. Frame Game avoided showing his face. That's a wise idea. In his videos or appearances, during which he pushed a variety of far-right narratives, including the Great Replacement Theory. You know, that one that posits that the white race is being eradicated in America for politics and profits. In others, Frame Game said he was a white identitarian, railed against the idea of diversity, and made montages urging white viewers to unite under the banner of race. Shocking twist, surprise ending, he's Jewish. And yet still, in interviews with white nationalists, Frame Game blamed Jews for, ready, controlling the media and for the decline of the white race. If you were to remove the Jewish influence on the West, he said in one video, white people would not face the threat of white genocide that they currently do. Hey, what's wrong with you, you idiot? Frame Game stopped posting in 2018. A review of his content revealed various details that match Benz's appearance and life story. How do you like that? Benz, in his public posts and appearances, has not espoused the same racist views as Frame Game, because that would get him in trouble, you see. Frame Game went to some lengths to conceal his identity, but inadvertent slips during several live streams in which he would often visit web pages and toggle between browser tabs betrayed his anonymity. In one video, Frame Game brought up a website that automatically pulled a Facebook profile picture into its comments section, where he was commenting, of course. The picture appeared to be Benz with his then wife. He's changed wives because family stability, something, white race. Anyway, Benz's voice is also similar to Frame Game's. There's a clip below taken from the above video, and then another clip taken from a video that Benz, as himself, posted to X. You can use it to compare the voices. In other videos, as Frame Game toggled windows, he displayed a web browser that showed the username Mike. In another instance, a profile page showed him signed into a browser as Michael. In one instance, Mike can be seen in the browser alongside a separate browser window that's logged into Twitter, displaying Frame Game's avatar of a person in a green hoodie. So, bad OPSEC there, if you will. In podcasts and on social media, Frame Game divulged other biographical information that mirrors details found in Benz's public records and archived social media accounts. Frame Game often shared his background as a Jewish attorney living in New York City. Gee whiz. Do you think any of the alt-right weirdos he was palling around with would be ordinarily cautious about dealing with a Jewish attorney from New York City? And he told interviewers that he had studied psychology at an Ivy League college, graduating magna cum laude. Congratulations. But anyway, these details match an archived LinkedIn profile for Benz, which said he graduated magna cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania with a bachelor's degree in psychology. An acquaintance of Benz, who asked not to be named because of fear of backlash from Benz's followers, told NBC News that Benz had once told them he published online under the name of Frame Game. That would seem to solve it. Reached by phone, Benz declined to speak to a reporter, saying he was very busy. When asked if he had a comment on his previous writings as Frame Game, Benz hung up. He did not respond to voice messages and text messages with a detailed list of questions. Hours after publication on Friday, Benz posted a lengthy statement confirming his connection to the Frame Game account. He said the account was a covert effort intended to somehow, get this one, combat the anti-Semitism that it espoused. The account in question was a project by Jews to get people who hated Jews to stop hating Jews. He wrote, "Let me be clear, I am extremely proud of this," which is, of course, why he hid his face the whole time. So how do you like that? Yes, my online anti-Semitism was an effort to agree with anti-Semites so that they would say, these Jews aren't so bad, they're anti-Semitic too. What a great plan. Fantastic. There's much more to the article. You should, by all means, read through it. I just sort of wanted to throw it out there as, another example of some of the things that go on and the weirdness that goes on in the shadows in the right wing, but also the more obvious weirdness that when people like Trump take power, or let's say Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise or any one of them, when they take power, they tend to use that power to give legitimacy to their wackadoodle views. And something, underpants gnomes, Alexa starts telling you that the election has been stolen. It really does. There's a real connection there. You just start giving official imprimaturs of competency and reliability to idiots as part of a genuine and intentional plan to sow disinformation out there and to make it look legitimate.
From networksradio.com.
And then Alexa starts telling you it is.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what he's got on tap and what he'll be talking about. Let's see, of course, the GOP's lies on Israel's attack, or the attack on Israel funding, is exposed, while Tuberville continues his military holds. And then, of course, a roundup from around the country and around the world. Plenty to look at today. Stay tuned.